Hi, hello, and welcome back to this episode of Geography Girl. And today I'm going to be talking about how East Berlin was specifically designed so that it could surveil on people. Most cities like London, Paris, grow organically, but East Berlin was something different. It was a city designed not just to house people, but to symbolize a socialist future, and was designed very deliberately to watch them. Between 1949 and 1989, the German Democratic Republic transformed East Berlin into a landscape that was built on surveillance. Streets were widened or narrowed depending on how well they supported patrol routes. Housing blocks that were built to support the masses also had very thin windows and walls, and entire neighbourhoods were relied upon to provide information and sometimes bulldozed if they offered too many blind spots. As well as being Germany's capital, Berlin was one of the Cold War's pressure points. With the rest of East Germany being firmly behind the Iron Curtain, Berlin was a western island in the middle of a socialist territory. This created three pressures that shaped East Berlin. First was the constant fear of defection. Between 1949 and 1961, around 2.7 million East Germans fled to the west, often through Berlin. There was fear of embarrassment on the world stage. East Germany wasn't just losing citizens, it was losing workers like doctors, lawyers, engineers. Walter Ulbricht, who played a leading role in establishing the Weimar-era Communist Party of Germany, was a chief decision maker in the East German Republic and famously complained, "We are bleeding out through Berlin." With such a significant brain drain and loss of expertise and skills, even more checkpoints were closed on the Berlin Wall, meaning for that the 28 preceding years, ways in and out became far more structured and stringent. There was also direct visibility from NATO. West Berliners could literally look into East Berlin from their balconies. East Berlin therefore had a city where people were contained, people could be observed, and where Western eyes couldn't necessarily see the cracks in the socialist image if these were covered up well enough, and therefore the city becomes a surveillance project. The wall becomes an urban planning tool. The Berlin Wall was a barrier, and also a complete landscape designed for observation. There was the Death Strip, which was a 30 to 150 metre wide zone, with floodlights, anti-vehicle trenches, automatic firing systems that were installed between 1971 and 1984, and watchtowers every 250 metres. The Death Zone was deliberately flattened and raised so you could see a human figure instantly. It was an engineered visibility field. It was patrolled and watched closely, with tripwire and covered in sand to make footprints easily visible. Guards were authorised to shoot anyone that tried to escape. Streets were also rerouted for surveillance. Streets like Berner Strasse were redesigned so that western-facing buildings be sealed, evacuated or demolished. This part of the wall was unique, and it was only an apartment block that formed part of the border. When the Berlin Wall was constructed in 1961, it drew much attention. Streets like Berner Strasse were redesigned so that western-facing buildings could be sealed, evacuated or demolished. This part of the wall was unique as it was only the apartment block that formed the border. When the Berlin Wall was constructed in 1961, it drew much attention due to the dramatic escape attempts. People literally tried to jump out of windows. And this is where the first deaths of people trying to cross the wall or the border occurred. 2,000 residents were driven out and entire facades were bricked over so escapees couldn't jump from windows. There were also towers embedded into neighbourhoods. From 1971, the GDR added over 302 concrete watchtowers, some right next to residential districts. These became the neighbourhood eyes. The one in Berner Strasse watchtower is the eldest. It is now a preserved site, but many have been dismantled. Spying through housing. East Berlin's housing blocks, the famous Plattenbau panel buildings, were built for affordability, speed and socialist aesthetics. But they also came with built-in surveillance advantages. There were straight sight lines. Tower blocks were laid out to create long corridors visible from a single landing, predictable movement patterns, and central courtyards with only one or two exits. This allowed housewatch officers, who were block wardens, to easily monitor who visited who came home late, and the Hausbausch, literally the house book, was a record kept for every building. Shared utilities also created monitoring opportunities. Heating and letters passed through centralised systems. Plumbing and heating shafts weren't very well insulated and doubled as sound tunnels. Real Stasi files record instances of officers listening through heating ducts. And in Plattenbau, the walls were thin. This meant that there was the opportunity for neighbours to listen in on conversations and report them. This was important because the GDR's Military for State Security, the Stasi, saw human density as a surveillance asset. In the 1980s, East Germany had one informant per 6.5 citizens, which is the densest citizen spy network ever recorded. In a feat of stunning prefabricated efficiency, the GDR erected 3 million apartments by 1988, and I think this might deserve an episode in itself. Whilst many countries in the West are facing a housing crisis, this time in East Germany, sometimes some residents only had to wait 50 days between tools in the ground and being given the keys for their new apartment. In East Germany, everyone had a right to housing. There wasn't really at this time homelessness or evictions. These houses did unfortunately go into disrepair and get damp and mould. The cultural legacy of these houses are now being explored, reckoned with, and in part celebrated. They have been heavily criticised for their mundane appearance, but also celebrated for the role that they played in the collective memory, and even serving as a socialisation environment, with a sense of community integrated with infrastructure and access to amenities like an inside toilet, represented a major upgrade from pre-war living. It wasn't just homes that were designed for surveillance, other buildings were too. The Stasi HQ in Lichtenberg, now a museum, was in itself a small city. There were 50 plus buildings, 20,000 employees, and archives holding 111 kilometres of files. Even the building itself looks imposing, intimidating and grey. Inside you would find hidden microphone laboratories, rooms for steaming open letters, and soundproof interrogation chambers, and also smell sample archives where the Stasi collected body odours for dog tracking. Within these apartments, there were also opportunities to place bugs. Vattenfall's electrical conduits were accessible from service corridors. This made wiretapping fast and invisible. There was no drilling required. Stasi agents were known to break and enter into people's apartments when they were out to install a microphone. One famous case was in the 1970s of a relatively well-known dissident, Robert Haverman, who had microphones placed inside the concrete walls during renovations. Also, public parks were built for oversight. The Place de République, built in 1976, was at the seat of the GDR parliament, featured massive windows facing the river, a symbolic of transparency, and backstage hallways where Stasi plainclothes agents patrolled during events. The streets were also built for social control. East Berlin wasn't just surveilled inside buildings, the streets themselves were engineered for monitoring. Just like in Haussmann's Paris, there were wide boulevards for movement control. The Karl Marx Allee, formerly Stalin Allee, was 90 metres wide, perfectly straight and lined with Stalinist wedding cake style buildings. This was specifically designed so that troops could move quickly through them and to prevent barricades. There was also visibility from above. The viewing tower of Alexanderplatz, built in 1969, is a famous propaganda icon. It gave the regime a 360-degree view over protest hotspots, large crowds and escape routes. There were also heavily controlled spaces, like the train station at Bahnhof Friedrichstraße, which were built with elevated control galleries, one-way glass and choke points for bag searches. The Traunenpalast, the Palace of Tears border crossing, is still preserved today, with its original partitioned inspection booths. The economics of surveillance. Why did the GDR invest so much in spying? In some ways, surveillance replaced or filled in for a functioning economy. By the late 1970s, East Germany's economy lagged behind the West's. There were chronic housing shortages, energy crises, and productivity of 50 to 60% of that of West Germany. Instead of fixing these at the root causes, East Germany, the regime relied on surveillance to prevent dissent. This gave the opportunity to manufacture a social peace through fear rather than wealth. In Western cities, public spaces were animated by leisure, like cafes, department stores, and entertainment. In East Berlin, cafes were limited, travel was restricted, consumer goods were scarce and heavily controlled, and nightlife was monitored. The GDR felt that if people could not gather, then they could not rebel. In some areas, neighbourhoods were left to decay. The historic district of Alt-Berlin near the Nikolai-Viertel was deliberately left to decay in the 1960s. It was only reconstructed in the 1980s as a sanitised, socialised version of heritage, built in a style that mimicked medieval buildings to celebrate the 750th anniversary of Berlin. The social and cultural consequences of surveillance. Inevitably, there was a collapse of trust. By the 1980s, teachers informed on students, children informed on parents, artists informed on other artists, and priests and doctors were systematically infiltrated. And so the city and its civilians began to become fearful of itself. This pushed creative scenes underground. East Berlin's counterculture, punk, art collectives, underground churches developed in the shadows. These movements used geography creatively in basements, abandoned factories, and in hidden courtyards. There was also a culture of silence and double entendre. Many East Berliners grew up speaking in coded language and jokes with double meanings, because they knew that anyone in the city could be listening. How the city fought back, 1989. Despite this immense system of visible and invisible watching, urban geography helped undo this in the GDR. There were protests concentrated in key squares. Alexanderplatz, once the surveillance-friendly square, hosted a 500,000 in-person demonstration on the 4th of November 1989. And it is very ironic that this place that was designed for surveillance was then used for revolution. Border crossings became choke points and then pressure valves. The 9th of November 1989, confusion at border checkpoints like Bornholmer Strasse left guards to open the gates. So this very architecture that was meant to prevent escape became too rigid to adapt during a crisis. Memory of this surveillance state is still imprinted on parts of Berlin. There is still parts of the Wall, the Watchtower and Stasi Museum. There's also the remnants of the Plattenbau estate. But the collective memory is quite powerful. It wasn't a city that was watched, but also a city that was built to be watched. And that's it for today's episode. I really hope you liked this look at how East Germany was built for surveillance specifically. If you would like to see an episode about the Plattenbau housing estates, maybe I'll do that. Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, give us a like and subscribe for more. I bring out new episodes every Tuesday. Goodbye!